thank you again for everybody coming out, and I'll let Mayor McCabe kick things off for us.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone.
Hey.
And welcome to the Fair City of Pekin. Show of hands, how many of you, this is your first trip to our Fair City? Oh, wow. Okay, glad you're here, and I'm going to invite you to please return to Pekin as often as possible. Just to give you a little bit of information about what we have to offer here, well, this beautiful facility. This dome is the second one in the state of Illinois. The first one was built at Rosemont, right outside Chicago, there by O'Hare Field. And this is the second one, and it's been put to use for a lot of things, as I'm sure you can imagine. We're also the county seat of Tazewell County. Tazewell County has over 300,000 tillable acres. And so when you stop and think about that, that means there's a lot of opportunity with regards to what it is you're going to be discussing here this afternoon. I also like to take pride in the fact that we are the county seat. We are the home of the late Senator Everett McKinley Dirksen. And as a result of that, we now claim to be, unofficially, the marigold capital of the world. This was a flower that the senator was always so excited about, and it was decided some years ago as a way to commemorate his honor, we host this Marigold Festival. If you've never been to our Marigold Festival, I invite you to be here. It's always the weekend after Labor Day. It's a really phenomenal event. We have a committee that goes all out to try to do what they can. We have a phenomenal parade. We always have a special guest. We've had people such as Lee Smith from the Chicago Cubs. I can't remember the guy's name now. He was a TV actor that played a motorcycle cop on TV some years ago. We've had guys from the Pickers that were here. So it's a terrific opportunity. Mark your calendars, the weekend after Labor Day, and I think you'll really enjoy it and have a great time. The reason I'm excited about this is because Pekin has the opportunity to be a part of this new industry. As I'm sure everybody in the room is very well aware, in the last year, both the state and federal government have now made it legal for the industrial cultivation of the product of hemp, and there are many different variety of uses for it. As I said, there's 300,000 plus tillable acres in Tazewell County, and we also have here in the city of Pekin what we call an industrial park, which would be an opportunity for some sort of facility or facilities that could be part of this great new idea. Now, obviously, like any new venture, there's going to be some issues, there's going to be some problems. But I'm sure that some of the information you're going to get today is going to be of great help and great use to you. And so we can get the ball rolling on this. And like I said, think of Pekin, remember what we have to offer. And this is a centrally located place. I mean, we're right here on the Illinois River. We've got major railroads going through here. We're just a few miles from the interstate. We have opportunities here. We're the home of the second largest I can't even think what I call it now, Pacific ethanol plant, the second largest one in the country. And so you can see that we have some things that are already going on in our community that are related to the production of agriculture, and we want to invite you to think about us with all that you're going to be doing in the future with this great opportunity, because I think that we can work with you and make it a great opportunity for both of us. Just so happens, I noticed in the back of the room is also standing up is our county board chair, Mr. David Zerman. I'm sure he is glad and excited that you're here as well, and probably shares my enthusiasm for the fact that this is an opportunity for our whole region to develop something that is going to promise to be, I'm sure, a very worthwhile product. One of the byproducts is, I think it's called CBD, is that correct? And we have at least two different shops here in the city that sell this particular product. I was just introduced to it last week and found that it is quite interesting. So I didn't realize, I thought, hemp, okay, rope, I don't know what you're supposed to do with it, but it sounds like it's going to be a great opportunity. These guys are going to give you a lot of terrific information. Again, I just want to say welcome, thank you for being here, and please keep Pekin in mind whenever it is you're thinking of your future ventures. So enjoy your day.
Thank you very much, Mayor, and thank you for hosting us in your fine city, and thank you to Avanti's Dome for hosting us, and everybody that has done so much work the last couple weeks to pull it together, this great panel. This is definitely much larger than we expected, but I'm very excited that this turnout has been this way. Maybe I wanted to start with, can we get a gauge in the room of who's here and why you're here? So, and when you walked in, we tried to kind of get this from everybody, but if you're a farmer, go ahead and raise your hand. Great. If you're planning on working something in the processing or manufacturing side of hemp, raise your hand. Cool. Financial services in some way related to hemp. There's one, there's two. I know out in there's some insurance guys out in the hall too that are interested. Anyway, government, of course yeah, all right. So we got a lot of farmers, a lot of people planning to work in the hemp industry in some way. So I'm Tori Dahlhoff. I work for the Greater Peoria Economic Development Council. I'm the Director of Communications and the Rural Development Coordinator for our organization. We cover a 5-county region. That's Peoria, Woodford, Tazewell, Mason, and Logan counties. And that's our 5-county district that we work in for as is defined by the Economic Development Administration. So we are here to sort of foster economic development in those 5 counties. We have a comprehensive economic development strategy that we work with numerous partners on throughout our region to kind of move the needle on economic development. I started this program, this is the first in a series that I'm starting called Farm Forums. I'm really interested in how, as a piece of rural economic development, how we can really take a closer look at the food and ag economy, and given all of the assets that we have in our region and Central Illinois at large, what could we be doing on top of our traditional agriculture to diversify our farmlands, to diversify our economy, and to innovate. There's lots of innovative ideas out there, and I know there's more and more interest in diversifying ag lands, and say in Chicago, which is, I believe, the second largest cluster of food manufacturing in this country. You think of all the food startups that are coming out of Chicago, out of our state. How can Central Illinois play a role in that supply chain? So there's a lot to do. So with industrial hemp, I saw this as the first in the series, a great way to kick things off. How could industrial hemp, with the legalization of growing it, tie into economic development in our region and in our state? So we put together this fine panel. Before I get to the panel, sorry. I did want to show, I've just been poking around. I've been learning a lot the last few months about hemp. I do not pretend to be an expert on this, nor have I really, researched it beyond, the late summer, fall, when we started to see things at the state. At least that's when I started to notice them. And so I'm just very interested in this industry. As you can see, so this is just a little history of Illinois, and this is in Lexington, Illinois. Apparently there used to be a hemp processing facility around World War II. So obviously industry was here. This was a harvester made by International Harvester out of Chicago. That's in the middle of a hemp harvest right here. So these things were happening, and we had things obviously stalled out for many decades. We're not going to pick up where we left off, right, because so much has changed. But we have the assets here. We have the manufacturing, we have the ag land, as the mayor was pointing out. So how can we work together in our region and our state to really develop a supply chain, a truly regional, statewide supply chain? So we pulled together this panel, and we have quite a large panel because there's so much to talk about, but I wanted to at least try and touch on all of the basics that are out there, and most of all, in the second part of the panel, get to some of that commercial side of, okay, if I grew it, who would buy it? So pulled together a couple companies located in our region that have said we may do that, if not now, at some point. So starting to try and build those connections between some growers and some potential processors, and how do we start to fill these gaps in that supply chain? So joining us, all the way from Washington, D.C., Renee, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
Yay! So our first panelist is actually not here in person, but she's with the Congressional Research Service. She'll be giving us an update on the federal side of things. Liz Ruppel down there with the Illinois Stewardship Alliance, State Policy, Dr. Winthrop Phippen with Western Illinois University. He'll talk about his work. He led the first 2 experimental field trials, right, of industrial hemp last year. We also have Kevin Pilarski with, not the Illinois Stewardship Alliance, but as it says up there, but with Revolution Enterprises. And he'll explain more about that. Dr. Luke Haverhall's Natural Fiber Welding, and Eric Pullett with Global Hemp Incorporated. So, without further ado, we will start things off with Renee, and she's going to give us an overview of federal policy.
Okay, good afternoon, Illinois. I'm Renee Johnson. I'm calling in from Washington, D.C., where we also got some snow, but about a half an inch, but that's enough to kind of bring the city to a close sometimes. I'm a policy specialist for the U.S. Congress, working for the Congressional Research Service. And I'm going to provide a overview of U.S. hemp policy, just as a way of kicking things off and focusing on changes in the 2018 Farm Bill, which built on changes initially enacted in the 2014 Farm Bill. So next slide, number 2, please. So the first order of business is really to clarify the differences between hemp and marijuana, and this is complicated by the fact that it's all cannabis sativa, so it's all the same plant. However, it's a plant with separate male and female parts, and depending on how it's cultivated, you can end up with 2 genetically distinct cultivars. You can also take steps to select for different uses and chemical makeup in the plant depending on its intended use. For example, whether it's for food, fiber, fuel, or for use for its oil seeds or for its leaves and flowers. And selecting for different traits through cultivation is how you can end up with one plant that has high levels of cannabis's psychoactive chemical compounds versus a plant that has higher levels of its non-psychoactive chemical compounds. And since I'm not an agronomist, Wynn is going to do a much better job of explaining this with pictures later, but the takeaway is this. Hemp and marijuana are very different overall. Marijuana has higher levels of psychoactive cannabinoids, or THC, which is tetrahydrocannabinol, and is very different than hemp, with its low levels of THC and relatively higher levels of the non-psychoactive cannabinoids, usually CBD or cannabidiol. And this leads to marijuana being more valued for its recreational use, given its high psychoactive compounds, for its recreational or medicinal use as a drug, while hemp is more of an industrial product with multiple uses spanning a wide range of food, fiber, and other uses. So next slide, please, number 3. So hemp and marijuana are also treated very differently in U.S. law in terms of how they're defined in statute. While I won't read these statutory definitions in the interest of time, the thing to note is that the definition of hemp sets a strict threshold of how much THC, that's the psychoactive compound, is allowed to be present, no more than 0.3% THC. And it's this 0.3% THC threshold that's critical to understanding how hemp differs from marijuana and how each are regulated. Namely, any cannabis or cannabis-derived product with more than 0.3% THC is considered to be marijuana and defined in U.S. drug laws. And we'll talk a little bit about that later, but really the focus is on hemp. So next slide, please, number 4. And this really just shows the types of uses of hemp, whether for fiber, seed, oil, leaves, flowers. But these uses are better illustrated in the next slide, number 5, please. This shows, and other people are going to speak more about the U.S. markets later, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but the U.S. The Hemp Industry Association estimates that U.S. retail sales of hemp-based products totaled nearly $820 million in 2017. And roughly the market is composed of food, body products, and industrial products, each with about 20% of the retail market, fiber and textile products with about 10% of the market, and a full 30% of U.S. sales in 2017 composed of CBD and other hemp-derived dietary supplements. Again, others are going to discuss this later on, but one takeaway is that hemp-based products are widely being sold in the United States, but to date, most of the inputs and ingredients for these products has been imported, mostly from Canada, who legalized their hemp industry in the 1990s, but also China and Europe, where there haven't been policies that strictly limit hemp production. Especially in my area, some of the markets are very strong with a growing hemp retail. Like Whole Foods has a large line of hemp-based food and body care products, as well as sells a lot of CBD and other hemp-derived dietary supplements. So let's get on to the hemp policy discussion and how hemp has evolved in the United States. So hemp production in the United States, as Tori mentioned, actually has a very long history. It used to be a USDA-supported crop during the two world wars, mostly for its fiber, but legal production stopped in the 1950s as hemp became kind of wrapped into U.S. drug laws. But given a growing market and consumer demand for hemp, Congress enacted a pilot program for research purposes as part of the 2014 Farm Bill. And the 2014 provisions allowed for hemp cultivation under certain circumstances. Namely, it had to be conducted in a state that had state laws in place to allow for its cultivation, and cultivation also had to be done by either a state Department of Agriculture or an institute of higher learning, such as a land-grant university. The 2014 Farm Bill also established a statutory definition setting that 0.3% THC threshold, distinguishing it from marijuana. However, despite the 14 Farm Bill, it was still subject to U.S. drug laws at the federal level, limiting its interstate commerce. So next slide, please, number 7.
In just about 5 more minutes, Renee.
So after the 14 Farm Bill was enacted, several states enacted laws to allow for hemp cultivation within their state. Prior to the 14 Farm Bill, only about 10 states allowed for cultivation, but now there are nearly 14 states that have enacted such laws, including Illinois, which enacted its own law in August 2018, and Liz is going to speak about the Illinois law and its proposed regulations. Next slide, please, number 8. Data collected by the Vote Hemp folks show that following the 14 Farm Bill, the number of acres in hemp has grown in the United States has grown from about 10,000 acres in 2016 to about 80,000 acres in 2018. But for the farmers in the room, that 80,000 acres is still quite small. So there's a lot of room for growth. So next slide, please, number 9. So despite efforts in the 2014 Farm Bill, there were a number of issues suggesting that additional action was needed to allow for full hemp cultivation in the United States. Namely, there were continued enforcement actions by the DEA and statements and actions by DEA and other federal agencies regarding restrictions on its use and distribution of hemp-based products. A number of cases were also taken to court. During this time, Congress took action to limit the activities of the DEA and other federal agencies that were actively limiting cultivation, and they introduced a number of bills proposing to expand cultivation and use and remove restrictions that still remain on banking services and the use of water in some jurisdictions. Next slide, please, number 10. That gets us to the present day. Actually, in December 2018, after a year of debate, Congress reauthorized omnibus Farm Bill legislation as part of the Agriculture Improvement Act of 2018. And it addressed hemp across several bill titles and across multiple Farm Bill provisions. Perhaps the most important is the first one that's listed here. It's a provision that amends the Controlled Substances Act that kind of carves out hemp from the statutory definition of marijuana. This removes hemp as defined in statute, again, that 0.3% THC threshold, subject to that is defined in statute and also subject to USD oversight, and we're going to get into that a little bit. It removes hemp from the Controlled Substances Act and from being regulated as a Schedule I drug. And it is this that legalizes the cultivation, processing, marketing, and sale of hemp and any cannabinoid such as CBD, as it is defined again in statute and subject to USDA regulations. So it's legal if if a product is derived from hemp that is produced in a manner consistent with the Farm Bill, including complying with associated federal regulations, state regulations, and produced by a licensed grower. And this is kind of the important takeaway, especially for farmers considering whether or not to grow hemp. And then in addition to that, another huge barrier was restrictions on interstate commerce, and the 2018 Farm Bill removed that. Next slide, please, number 11. And these next three slides describe the regulatory framework that Congress is requiring of USDA and the states for legally growing hemp in the United States. And there are kind of three broad takeaways. Again, it's that whole thing about the 0.3% THC, USDA oversight with state regulatory agencies also involved in a very important way, and the need that hemp be cultivated by a licensed grower. And the regulatory framework that's described over these next three slides is largely through amendments to the Agricultural Marketing Act of 1946, also, or the AMA. And it is this provision, which is Section 10113 of the 2018 Farm Bill, that lays out kind of 5 separate AMA provisions explaining the regulatory process. And kind of briefly, so in AMA 297A, it defines hemp, and it states the requirements for obtaining approval from USDA. And we don't know what that approval process is going to look like, since USDA is expected to develop and implement regulations, which could take some time. Sometimes it takes years. The section also describes certain restrictions with regard to eligibility of convicted felons and clarifies that USDA might provide technical assistance to develop plans. And then the AMA 297B provides some indication of what a state plan would look like that would be submitted to USDA for approval, and it would include things like grower location, licensing, procedures for testing, inspections, background checks, disposal of hemp that doesn't fall within the statutory definition, enforcement of regulations, among other requirements. So, this is not a total free pass. There's a lot that's going to be required, that could be onerous for some. It also explains what happens if a state plan is denied or revoked, explaining the process for resubmission. Another part of the AMA also describes what happens in states that don't have state laws in place or that don't submit plans to USDA for approval. And in that case, USDA would step in with primary jurisdiction with its own developed plan. And then finally, other sections of the AMA, of the new AMA, provides how USDA would develop regulations in an expeditious manner. Doesn't really, and that it would also provide some appropriations that's necessary. And then, in the interest of time, the last two slides, 13 and 14, really just describe how hemp would also be eligible for USDA research programs and also eligible for federal crop insurance, which could be important for some producers. But it would involve also additional action from USDA, since they would need to approve any new crop insurance products that would need to be developed that address the concerns of hemp producers. I'm sorry if I went a little over, but that's all I have for now, and I'll take any questions during Q&A.
Thank you, Renee, and I know that's a lot of information. First of all these slides will be available. I know that's a lot of text, a lot to go over, but these will be available to read those in detail, and when we get to Q&A, Renee will be sticking around to answer any questions about the federal side of things. So we're going to keep things moving along kind of quickly like this for all these presentations. I know it's kind of a lot to take in, but we want to make sure we at least do a brief overview of everything. So that main takeaway is Farm Bill legalized it. There's still a lot to do at the federal level. The USDA has a whole process that they have to put in place, and then that will tie into what needs to happen at the state level. And here's Liz to give us an overview of the state.
Hello, everyone. Some of you may have heard my voice on the Industrial Hemp Google listserv that we are overseeing at the Stewardship Alliance. So if you have heard my voice, please come up and introduce myself. I just want to match a face with a name. But yes, my name is Liz Rupel. I'm the policy organizer at the Illinois Stewardship Alliance. I'm going to be talking to you today about what's going on the state side. What are we seeing with the rules and regulations that were proposed? Just a little bit about our organization. We are a statewide membership-based nonprofit. We are doing work to build and cultivate local food and farm systems. And we want them to be environmentally sustainable, economically viable, and socially just. So we are working on a main goal of keeping family farms operating and keeping family farmers on the farm. Our work takes us to the local food side, the state and federal policy for food and farms, and we also do a lot of work in soil health with conservation practices and looking at regenerative agriculture. But we can't do it alone. That's why we are a membership-based organization. We want to build up the voices of our members, create leaders, and share really inspiring stories. And that is truly how we started our work with industrial hemp. We have not been advocating for hemp professionally as long as maybe Eric has, who's been advocating for hemp to be legalized for a couple decades now. Our work has taken us back to 2017. Salvador is out in the crowd here. He is a local hemp clothing designer, Don Salvador, so he might be wanting to talk to a couple farmers out here. But we have folks like this, or Rachel Berry, or Rob Davies, Linda Klein, that are all in the crowd today that have advocated. They wrote letters, they made calls, and because of this total grassroots organizing of our members, of agencies, of other organizations, we were able to get something passed in 2018. Didn't pass in 2017, so we had to come back even stronger in 2018. Total bipartisan pass. Our champion was Representative Tim Butler, and Governor Ronner finally signed it, seemed like the last minute, on August 25th. So we had to celebrate. That's what we were really excited to do. It was our first time celebrating a big win like this. This is huge for Illinois farmers and our industry. It's going to help clean up our waterways and rebuild our soils. So we had to celebrate. Chad Wallace hosted an awesome party in his greenhouse. It was quite cold that night. He made us a huge bonfire, and I know that they also had a party up north. So we just like to have fun with it and celebrate our wins. But that brings us to maybe the more boring side of things. We're going to look at some general provisions, and I know this is very text heavy, but I do just want to highlight these key rules and provisions for you. I want to let you know what we have commented on, what concerns us, and I also want to know what we like about these rules. All in all, we have found that they are pretty good rules. We had requested, with the help of the Illinois Industrial Hemp Association, we have worked with, or it's the Illinois Hemp Industries Association, the Farmers Union, Environmental Council, and the Hemp Growers Association to make a key list of priorities that we're going to create a fair, inclusive, and non-discriminatory set of rules and regulations for small-scale farmers and larger-scale farmers. We felt they did a decent job at that, but that's why we have this comment period going on right now, so if you find that anything in these set of rules and regulations is something you don't like, you can make a comment on it. I want you to look at you need a license and you need to be registered. If you want to grow, produce, or handle hemp, you need to apply for this license or this registration. Also look at D and E. This is something that a lot of folks have made comment on. Currently, there are a small number of varieties of seed available, and we have found that after talking with our members, we don't want just one seed funneling through the system. We want a variety of seeds. So Rob Davies at the Illinois Farmers Union, he had a conversation with the Association of Official Seed Certifying Agencies. We're just going to call them AOSCA. And they are open to people developing varieties. They just have to follow their guidelines. So seek out a university like Western or Southern and get a group of growers that are interested in suggesting seeds to that university to take to ayahuasca. I think this is a process that is going to take a little time if we're going to get more seeds for Illinois, but I don't want you guys to be discouraged. It's just we have to put a little work into this. General provisions continued. Basically, don't grow marijuana and don't violate these rules. But more specifically, something that we really like is letter H. We're really happy. We think this is a very fair rule and doable for small-scale farmers. They are saying that you have to just have area of 1/4 of an acre for outdoor cultivation or 500 square feet for indoor. We believe that is super fair. Letter I, just know that if you have non-contiguous land area, you are going to have to apply for separate applications, separate licenses. So if you do have that kind of structure on your area of land, just know that your prices are going to increase. The draft rules. So to apply, we're going to get into the application in the next slide, but currently they are requiring 90 days for you to apply before you decide to plant. So when you figure out your plant date, which is totally up in the air right now, they want you to send your application in, which you can't even do right now, 90 days before. So this is something we're making comment on, and that they are open to lowering that number to make this a little more doable if we are to possibly get something in the ground, which is kind of unlikely this year, but maybe in a greenhouse. Number 2, background checks, very important. If we are going to comply with those federal regulations, if you are a license holder, a processor, a handler, you have to get a background check. If you're an LLC, for instance, and you are the person at the top of that list, you're the one that is going to have to get a background check. These forms are going to be supplied by the Department of Agriculture. I have made a comment that they should start this process as early as possible, or else they're going to be incredibly backlogged. They're looking into this, so hopefully we can start some background checks for those of you that would like to grow, to handle, or to process. Pretty much everything else in here is kind of self-explanatory, but I do want to point you to number 5 for the fees. $1,000 seems pretty fair, seems pretty reasonable. When you break it down, it's for 3 years, $330. That's pretty fair, but if you're a smaller farmer, which I know Rachel Berry has pointed this out, that's not as fair, because if she's not growing as much as someone that wants to do 200 plus acres, why should she pay the same amount? So the department is looking into making more of a graduated scale. In Wisconsin, for example, we're looking at what their rules are. It's $150 for 0 to 30 acres. It's $5 an acre for 31 to 199, and it's a $1,000 fee for 200 plus acres. And we are open to hearing your comments about that, but that is what we are thinking of making a comment on to just make this a little more fair for everyone. So, application, they just want your basic information about you and about your business. And I guess number 6 and 7, you have to be under the property tax code. Your land has to be a farm, so we cannot do any backyard gardening. And number 7, just note that to apply it's $100, but everything else is pretty self-explanatory on that. I would say, and when this is passed around, this is information that I think you guys, if you are wanting to grow, you should have this ready to go. You should have this ready to go for your application, know your legal description of your land area, have those GPS coordinates ready, and a map of your land area, just so you can get your application in as soon as possible. Processing and handling license is very similar to that. The only difference really is they want to know the nature of the processing or handling that you're doing. Also $100 to apply. Also for every area of your processing facility, it's going to be $1,000. The research plan, this is just data that the department needs to collect. I didn't find anything to be off about this. I think it's very fair, very similar to what already has to be collected. But they basically just want to know in this pre-planting report what you plan to do with your hemp. They want a proof of agreement, and they want you to list your harvest dates. And if anything changes, you have to let them know.
Who does that get filed with?
The department. All right, and continuing, another report, your harvest report, at least 30 days prior to your harvest. Basically here, they want to know what was planted. They want a description of those varieties, and they would like for you to, oh, I'm on the wrong one. The one before, let me go back. I went a little too fast. Pre-planting, just verifying your seeds, what those varieties are, and where you got them from. And then we went over that, and okay, so your cultivator final report. This is every year that they are wanting to know what was planted, the description of those varieties, and the yields that you collected. So just plan on 3 reports that you have to file with the Department of Agriculture. And inspection and sampling. I just really want to point your attention to number 4. Basically this says that all plants are subject to sampling, and if it tests hot, then basically it's going to be destroyed. We had heard from our members that we would like to find an alternative route for those plants, perhaps include those in the fiber industry, just so we don't lose profits and we don't have to waste the hemp that you spent so much time growing. So we have made that comment. We don't know if that's going to be approved or not, but the comment has been made, so we will see. But everything else there is pretty self-explanatory. So right now, since the rules passed on December 28th, we are currently in a 45-day comment period. That is going to end on February 11th. If you, after me going through these rules and talking with us today, if you find that there's something that you need and you want to make a comment on, you write to Miss Pamela, or you send something to me at the Stewardship Alliance, or the Illinois Environmental Council is going to open up a portal for comments. I'll explain that a little later. But please don't be shy. If there's something that you see that's unfit in these rules, make your comment. Public hearing, we did request that, and it's really important to just get public support at public hearings. If you feel that you can make it to Springfield on a to-be-decided date, it'll be in the late afternoon, hopefully within this comment period. We would love for you guys to come make a comment directly to the Department of Agriculture. It's really just it's strength in numbers. So please show support if you are able to. Timeline, big question mark there. So like I said, the last day to submit your public comment is February 11th. Public hearing is still to be decided, and USDA still has to look through our state plan. So currently there's no set date for applications. We could possibly see something happening in the summer months, but for you to put anything into the ground, that's really not going to work. I'm thinking if you want to experiment this year, that might be the route that you all should go in, maybe in a greenhouse. But I don't foresee anything actually getting into the ground this year, just at the rate that this needs to be done. But I feel like we should be focusing on currently right now on creating a really good set of rules. This is an industry that we need to sustain ourselves for years to come. And that can't be done if we just walk in and dive right in and try to plant seeds that we don't know where we're sourcing from. We need to build the industry up, we need to learn the ins and outs of this industry, and we need to create a really good set of rules. So that is a priority that I think maybe we should stick to. If you guys feel differently, you can yell at me soon. Our goal at the Stewardship Alliance is to create this awesome guide. There are going to be a ton of questions after I probably stop talking about what do I need to do, what's the timeline, what kind of helpful definitions can you provide me, where can I find seeds. So we want to create this guide. It'll be downloadable online for you all to look through. And a way to get this guide is out on the table. If you feel like filling out your information on a clipboard, I will put that onto our Industrial Hemp Google listserv. If you don't feel like doing that and you just want to send me an email directly, that is my email, and I will add you right away. You will know about our bi-monthly calls that we have to discuss hemp. It's a great networking opportunity. A lot of these folks on the panel are on that now. And I just want to end by saying that, you know, the Illinois Stewardship Alliance, we really want to be your resource. If you have questions about policy, especially with hemp, we want to help you guys with that, and we want to help you solve those issues. And if you are a farmer and you're facing any kind of other issues, please let us know. We're here to build and revitalize local food and farm systems, and we can't do that without the input from you all. So call us at the office, email me.
All right, good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. I'm Dr. Wayne Fippen. I'm the director of the Alternative Crops Research Program at Western Illinois University. I've been there about 18 years, and hemp is one of the newest crops that we've been working on. And so, because we were under the last year's rules on the pilot program, anybody that was interested in growing hemp in the state had to go through a 4-year institution. And so I had 2 producers that approached me and said, hey, I'd like to get some seed in the ground. Try to get some seed into the ground. And so I worked with these producers. Essentially what we did was they came up with a project idea. They wanted to start trying some seed production, and I was the agent in charge and essentially helped them put through all the paperwork. There was a lot of unknowns at the time, so we had to deal with security plans, listing all the individuals that would have access to the property, who else would have access to the property, could it be seen from public roadways, things like that. And so I helped them out with a lot of that sort of the paperwork. So my intent today is just to show you some of the things we learned, what worked and what didn't work, and lots of pictures for you. So I had 2 projects. One was out of Warren County, up near Roseville, and the other one was down in Mason County. I'm hoping you could see this, so I'm going to give you a little bit up to date on. So the Mason County project was simply looking at variety selection. We brought in 2 varieties out of Colorado. Again, this person was solely interested in CBD oil production. This was a grower that had experience with hemp. They knew how to grow it in Colorado. Said, hey, I'll try to grow that, do the same thing here in Mason County. They happen to have property in Mason County. They actually picked a pivot irrigation location, fairly sandy soil. It was in a corn-soybean rotation, but the reason he had picked it because it was nice flat ground and it was right on a pivot irrigation, so we had access to water, which is important. So here you can see the center pivot. The previous crop was soybeans. Some of the site issues that we dealt with from the previous GPS photograph you saw there, there was no protection from the west. So there was a very windy area, and so these plants get quite large. By the end of the time, they were 6 to 7 feet tall, and if that's unprotected and you've got a lot of rain, the soil's saturated, you have a tendency to blow those plants over. The other issue was we did a lot of tilling. We worked up that ground a lot, so any sort of seed bed that was there, we've brought all those weed seeds to the surface. So weeding became a major issue. One other thing that's really important, as Renee alluded to earlier, we've grown hemp in the state before, and there's a lot of what we would call ditchweed around. So if you're interested in hemp production, there is going to be ditchweed around, and if you're aware of this ditchweed, you need to address that ditchweed. Legally, you're not allowed to go test it to see if it is hot, but your assumption is it's gonna be hot. It may or may not be hot, but it's going to be your responsibility to eradicate any other wild hemp that might be on your property that could potentially cross with your materials. So Mason County, if you're from Mason County, just driving up and down those roads, I think you'll find that there's a lot of ditchweed out there. So here's the plot. We've sort of carved it out. We've tilled it well. If you can look really closely there, you can see some strings that we've laid out. One of the really important things is for CBD oil production, picture sort of Christmas tree production. So you're planting plants every 5 feet within the row and 5 feet between the rows. And so you're going to get a plant that's maybe 3-4 feet wide, 6-7 feet tall. And then you've got to weed all that empty ground until it finally canopies, and then you shouldn't have any weeding problems. But if your plants are not perfectly on square, if you're planning on using mechanical tilling, say a tractor with a tiller on or something like that, if your rows are not perfectly straight, it sort of takes it out. And unfortunately, even though we did use strings, our plants were sort of wandering, and it precluded us from using tillers in both directions and making sure we're keeping our weeding down. I'll show you some tricks later on how to do that. So plants were started in a tiny little cold frame. You can sort of see it there. We didn't direct seed into the ground. These were little plugs that we would produce out in the field. And then they're transplanted out into the field on a grid system. And then obviously watered. Lots of nutrients. So by July 13th, I think we planted on June 8th. They were finally put into the ground. 1 month later, they're already 18 to 24 inches tall. This is a very fast growing plant. Everything was done by hand weeding, lots and lots of hand weeding. You can see a lot of debris around and a lot of glyphosate spraying just in between. There is no Roundup Ready hemp variety out there yet, so it all has to be done by hand.
Is there any type of chemical you can use?
No, absolutely not. No, nothing is registered on hemp in the state of Illinois. All right, because we were the newest program, ours had a much higher level of security than what is being proposed with the new rules. We were required to notify all local sheriffs, state police, everybody, and they had to come and have a site inspection. So everybody came out on one day and visited the plots and looked at our security plan, what was the access to the property, who could be on the property, and the works. It also gave them an idea of, boy, what are they really in for when we get into hemp production? And they finally realized that, no, you can't simply look at this plant and know if this is a hot plant versus not a hot plant. Even strolling through these fields, this is just a little side note, as you stroll through hemp production, you're going to get covered in these oils and resins. Then you're going to go get in your fancy car and drive around in town, or don't wear the same coat to church the next day. They wanted me to clarify what I meant by hot. So hot simply means you've crossed that barrier of THC. Delta THC has now gone over 0.3%. Okay, so you always have, if I say the word hemp, that implies that it's below the 0.3% THC. If it's hot, I mean you've crossed over that barrier, and now it's an illegal crop. So this is essentially how big it gets within a month. Whoops, a little too fast. All right. And so by a month later, already we're 4 to 6 feet tall. They're getting very bushy. We're still dealing with weeds, but we're starting to put on flower heads, and it's getting quite big. Weeding is a major issue. This is a labor-intensive crop.
For the CBD.
Yeah, for the CBD. I'm always talking about CBD for this particular crop.
From the mother, or did you germanize and then just put in a pea pod or a moss pod?
We bought seeds directly from Colorado.
Yeah.
They were put into
Pots.
peat pots, essentially, out in that cold frame, out in the field, and they were transplanting to the field. Our rules were that everything had to be done at the same location. I couldn't do it at a local greenhouse and then bring it to the property. It all had to be done there.
You transplanted in June, and by
You
August,
save
that's what it
questions.
looked like.
Yep. I'm supposed to take questions right at the end.
3 minutes.
Okay, cruising right along. Unfortunately, these plants sort of got out of control. They got very large. Stems got 3 to 4 inches in diameter, 8 feet tall. Because it was unprotected, we had a lot of heavy rain, heavy winds, and the whole field was just essentially leveled. When we came close time to harvest, we had to do our testing, and it came back that it was very low CBD. And so the lesson there was, you've got to make sure that the seed that you're getting is of the value that you're expecting. Because it was a very low CBD variety, the call was made saying, let's just get rid of the crop. And so it was chopped down, placed on a mat, it was dried down, and then the neighborhood had a great party and we burned the whole thing. So we had nothing off of that plot. It was essentially all destroyed. The next one I want to get to fairly quickly was a little bit better.
Sorry.
We were in a protected valley. This is outside of Roseville, Illinois. It was an old prairie. There was an alfalfa field. This is sort of the high ground here. the arrow better. Oh. So you can see sort of we're down in this valley. Some of the issues were we weren't that close to water source, so we buy hundreds and hundreds of feet of garden hose to get it out to the plot. Here we were looking at plant spacing trials. We wanted to see, does it really have to be 5 feet? Could we make it a little bit narrower? And so we looked at planting, within row plant spacing and between rows plant spacing. And again, we ran into those issues of those roads not being perfectly straight. The intent was to run a tiller this way and then run a tiller this way. That never worked out because our plant spacings got all goofed up. So here on June, we did try some direct seeding. The seed is of high value, so for these initial studies, we paid $1 a seed. $1 seed. So we bought a quarter of a pound for a couple $1,000, and I think we got 2,000 seeds altogether. But it was quite expensive, and so when we did plant directly, because we had tilled the soil really a lot, and we had very fine tilth to it, we got a lot of crusting. So hemp has difficulty coming up through a lot of crusting, so you do have to use a lot of hand weeding to sort of break up that crust. And here we are now July 9th. Plants are starting to look good. Lots and lots of hand weeding. Here to give you a general idea. This was July 11th when we're getting ready for the field inspection. So this plot was a little bit farther behind than the Mason County study. But there we are on August 26th. Looks like little Christmas trees. At this point, we're sort of done with weeding. Plants are looking great. That was my producer. His name was Andy Houston out of the Roseville area. Plants were looking fantastic. And that gives you an idea of that whole valley was just sort of filled in. Those yellow buckets that you see there were, how do you water once the plants get that big? We didn't have drip tape or anything like that. We went with 5-gallon buckets on top of posts, and that's where we taped our sprinklers, and then the sprinklers would just water the plots for us. So we had to go in for testing. Under our permit, we had to give them 10 days notice, saying that we want to harvest in 10 days, so you send out for a lab test. Lab test came back here, and under Delta 9 THC, it came in less at 0.1, so we were great, and we were ready to harvest. Most producers going for CBD are going to want to get that CBD level as high as you can right before you harvest, but you got to be careful that THC is also going to creep up, and so you want to make sure you harvest before you cross that 0.3 barrier. Plants are harvested by hand, put on a flat rack, brought to a tobacco building, and then hung up to dry. They need to cure for several days, and once it's dry, we've got plastic down at the bottom to catch any seed that may fall down. And then we go through a processing procedure. So the plants are all nice and dry. They're cut up into smaller pieces. They're run through a cylinder thresher to sort of break up the flower heads, get the seeds out. The intent here is to produce seed, and he's starting to produce seed. Some other ideas on harvesting. This gives you an idea of scale. So this is an airport hangar, okay? And these are 20 plants hanging per line up to the roof, and then the whole building is just filled with plants. This is more of what I would intend for CBD oil production. So here we're on black plastic. We've sort of got a raised bed with black plastic, minimize the weeding. You've got a little bit of grass space in between. This comes out of Colorado. And that way you can keep your weeding down to a minimum. Everything I've shown you so far was for CBD, so more to Christmas tree production. If you're looking for fiber production, as other folks are going to talk about, totally different method, different varieties, different schemes, less manual labor, but now you're trying to produce a 3/4 inch diameter stem, and it's sort of solid stand, like you would drill wheat. Grain production is very much the same way, a little less labor intensive, but now you're going to use a direct combine. You're going to use much shorter dwarf varieties that only get about 4 feet tall, and here you're just taking the grain heads. If you want just general guidelines, this handout that Revolution passed out, great little information on just basics of hemp production, but the University of Kentucky has great guidelines. There's a website here. You'll get this slide that you can click on this website. This is CBD and fiber production, and then for grain production. There's another great one there. And then the big question is testing facilities. I did put all the testing facilities that are in the state. It'll be your grower responsible for testing your products to make sure that it's not hot. And then these are the laboratories within the state that are registered with the state that can test for Delta THC. I'll be around long time to answer lots of questions. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Kevin, coming up next, one thing I meant to mention after Liz got done is on the agenda too, on the backside, there's some resources listed for that public comment period. That link is on there too. If you guys want to go through, if you do have public comment. And Liz, the Stewardship Alliance are also collecting the public comment as well.
Yes.
Okay. And Kevin from Revolution.
So I've got to stop off.
First off, 3 down, 3 to go. If anybody feels that they gotta get up and stretch their legs or needs to go to the bathroom, I won't be offended. So there we go. First off, my name's Kevin Pilarski. I have the good fortune of being part of the management team at a firm called Revolution Enterprises. We are a fully integrated medical marijuana company that's been in existence for 4 years, and we're fortunate enough to have our flagship facility very close to here in Delavan, Illinois. My presentation I will try to make quick because you've all got visual aids in front of you so you can follow along. My information and our CEO's information is in the back of those packets, and if you want to reach out for questions, we're certainly happy to have a discussion. I really have 2 objectives during today's talk. One is to give you a brief hemp industry overview, much of which has already been covered, so I'll probably blow through those slides pretty quickly. And then second, to talk about our plans to help develop the hemp market in Illinois. When talking to farmers, the first question I get is, if I grow it, where do I sell it? And we hope to have that solution for you. I'd also like to thank Renee and Liz and Dr. Phippen for what they've done to date. They've covered much of the material, and I probably won't have to go through as much as you see in front of you. So moving on to slide 4, I'm going to call your attention to a couple different things here. Bullet point number 4, fiber production of hemp requires something called decortication, which is the removal of the outside of the stalk from the inside of the stalk. The outside of the stalk is called the bast, which is the fibrous area. The inside is called the hurd, which is more of the woody area. The challenge in producing fiber is that that's a very dense crop, and if you've got to move it more than 100 miles, it's probably not worth growing. 200 you can maybe do if your yields are high enough, so you want to think about that. And the challenge, quite frankly, on the fiber side is that there is no supply chain in Illinois. The largest production facility is outside of Louisville, Kentucky. It's owned by a company called Sunstrand. And what they did in Kentucky, I think, is interesting and maybe a model for what we hope to do in Illinois. First off, they started with 149 acres of CBD production, and then over time, farmers moved on and morphed into seed and fiber. Hemp is still a very, very small crop on a national level. There's estimates of anywhere from 40 to 50,000 to 78,000 acres. By contrast, in Illinois alone, we did 11 million acres of corn and 10.5 million acres of soybeans, so I think you get a feel for how small it really is. We're going to blow through the next slide. Hemp's often called the wonder crop. You can read about that in your handout. As has been discussed, there's really 3 kinds of hemp that are grown: fiber, grain, and flower. In some cases, you can have a hybrid of fiber and grain. But again, the challenge is selling that fiber in the current market. We expect that there will be decortication facilities and the ability to use the fiber over time in Illinois, but it's not there yet. It's too nascent a crop. Some of the uses: fiber can clearly be used for all kinds of things, from from rope to hempcrete. The grain or the seed are often used in products that are sold in food stores. How many people have ever had hemp seed? How many people think it tastes good? Yeah, that's the challenge in my opinion. But it's also used for other things like creams and balms and what have you. Revolution's focus will be on the third piece, which is the floral material. I'm gonna blow past this slide, and you can read about it, and I'm also gonna blow past this one. I think this is the one that's important as we talk about flower. Hemp flower, it's important to think about hemp and how we develop an industry the same way we did with corn and soybeans. Mark and I have known each other since 1986. We met on the Chicago Board of Trade. We've both been involved in the cash and futures markets of grains here in Illinois. I think it's important that we have a standard We have a proposed standard, which we call 10-10. It's 10% CBD content with 10% moisture. And then you can have a discount or a premium to that standard. Obviously, that's going to have to be accepted by the industry, but we'd like to start that discussion sooner rather than later. The other thing I caution you on is when you hear quotes as to what your CBD crop will be worth, be very cautious. A year ago, CBD isolate, which is CBD that is 99.9% pure and is isolated from everything else, was selling at $10,000 a kilogram. Today it's as low as $4,500. So as more farmers come online, prices clearly have come down. If you look at that fifth bullet point or fourth bullet point on the right side, you'll see that last year, prices per pound for CBD flower were running 25 to 200. I would say it's more like 10 to 100 now. We already talked about how hemp is how CBD flower hemp is planted. Think about it akin to strawberries, 4 or 5 foot centers, very labor intensive. I think that's one of the reasons that farmers in Kentucky moved from CBD to classic row crops over time once the market was there. But you got to start somewhere, and we feel as though CBD is the best way to provide a cash crop at the onset. There's an immense opportunity set here. It's absolutely immense. If you think about it, not only do we currently import roughly $300 million in hemp products, mostly from Canada and China, but let's go a step further. I've been with the firm about 8 months, and in the first 2 weeks that I was there, I got a call from a major paper manufacturer, think diapers, toilet paper, paper towels, asking if we had any plans for biomass in Illinois. That is where the market's going to be, and that is, a $380 billion market. So think about the disruption that hemp could have. It takes 20 years to grow a tree. You grow a hemp crop every 10 weeks if you do it indoors, or certainly once a year. Hemp industry activity, much of this has already been gone through. What I would call your attention to is if you look at that graph, the right side, or 50% of all of hemp today is CBD or CBD related. Most of that CBD is in tinctures or topicals. So you'll hear about people either adding it to coffee or a drink or rubbing it on arthritic areas. The next slide, I think, is probably the most important in the deck. It speaks to the steps that we need to take over the next year or two in order to make this a viable alternative in Illinois. First, participation in providing that the rules are done right and that there is a framework that we can live with for a long period of time. Our CEO, Mark D'Souza, has been fortunate enough to be the only cannabis industry executive appointed to the governor's ag transition team. So we have a voice there. Mark, if you'd stand up real quickly. And our EVP of Production and Operations, Eric Deacock, is here. We'll be around for a little bit of time to ask questions. We've got a 3-hour ride back through the snow, so much after 3 o'clock you may have to just talk to Eric. Secondly, on this list, farm education and crop advisory and advocacy. I think that's what we're doing here today, right? Third, an aggregation of interest of planning intentions and forward contracting. We plan on forward contracting with farmers. Our goal would be to get to 100 acres. We have the capacity to take on 500 acres. Only 500 acres, you might ask. Trust me, when you start this process, you don't want to start with 10 acres. It's very labor intensive. And I'll talk later about some of the limitations that you're going to find. I'm going to blow through the next slide because we've already talked about much of that. The key to this slide really is point number 3, which is, we've got to incentivize farmers to try. And if you don't incentivize them and provide a way that at least you can break even, you're not going to be able to try it. And we're proposing that we're going to compensate farmers at a greater rate per acre than you're currently making with corn, at $1,000 minimum per acre. Hemp flower production chain. This is really important. Planting seems like the easy part, and trust me, it is. Harvesting is the hard part. Weeding and harvesting. CBD hemp plant can be anywhere from a 1/2 inch to 6 inches in diameter. It's not uncommon to find people or farmers using chainsaws to take their crop down. I'm serious. That's very much the way it is. Drying. You saw the airport hangar that Dr. Phippen showed. Drying can often be a limiting factor to your production, and that's why I say be careful as to how much you choose to bite off the apple. I've heard of farmers in Wisconsin that have grown hemp only to have it rot outside because they didn't have the drying facilities. Trimming and extraction, that's an area that we will take care of. Briefly, let me give you a little bit of a background about Revolution. We're a company that's clearly driven by science. We've been in the industry 4 years. We have expertise in extracting and formulating in the medical marijuana space, which is probably the most highly regulated industry in Illinois for sure. Clearly one of the highest regulated medical marijuana programs in the nation. We've got over 600,000 square feet of production space that we can utilize. We currently have a 10-acre plot, and we've just purchased over 70 acres outside of that plot in Delavan, and continue to hope to expand in the area and provide economic benefits to this part of the state. A brief timeline as to how long we've been in existence. We've got over 500 proprietary genetic strains, so one of the areas that we think we can be instrumental in is producing genetics that work in Illinois. I think part of the challenge that many have found is that they'll buy genetics from Colorado and Oregon and find that, hey, we've got different soil, we have different kinds of climate. It's going to take some time to figure out what works. We know 2 or 3 varietals that have done well in Wisconsin, and so those have been the ones that we've tried to procure, hoping that at least it's closer to our, our actual growing conditions. Yeah. Substantial hemp expertise in that we've been extracting CBD from low THC medical marijuana for the last 4 years. And again, we plan on putting a processing facility here in central Illinois so that not only the community can benefit, but that it's easier to transport, and the transporting costs to the facility makes sense. Last but not least, a quick commercial on what we do well. But you'll see that our contact information is at the bottom of that slide. And so if anybody has interest or would like further information, please feel free to reach out. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you to you guys for making those booklets available. That's a great resource. Next, we have Dr. Luke Hammerhals, Natural Fiber Welding.
All right, hello everyone. So I'm. Sorry.
Oh, I got it. I was hiding it from you.
Thanks for letting me talk to you all today. My name is Dr. Luke Hammerhals. I'm the founder and CEO of Natural Fiber Welding. I'm a PhD chemist. And I'm originally a farm kid from Iowa. So I'm going to tell you some things that I routinely tell my father and brother about how they can make a lot more money and in the future, and also about how we can eliminate petroleum-based plastics in the world, which is a multi-trillion-dollar per year opportunity. So you've seen, well, when I say plastics, by the way, I should point out that the focus today will be on textiles. So most of us would look at the plastic cups in front of us and think about that, and we have solutions for that someday. But right now, we'll focus on the fact that 2/3 of the tonnage of all textiles in the world are plastic, or polyester, for example. And that can be replaced by things like cotton, recycled cotton, and flax and industrial hemp, and all sorts of nice fibers you can grow. So there's well-known document, I don't need to tell anyone the horror stories about what it means to have too much plastic in too many different applications in the world. One of them that most people don't understand is when you wash your clothes, there's 1 billion wash machines in the world, and that ends up putting a tremendous amount of plastic microfiber into the watersheds, to the tune of, by 2050, there will be more plastic tonnage in the ocean than fish. And the answer is, when I look outside as a chemist, I can appreciate the beauty of nature, but I can also appreciate that plants are polymers, and polymers are nature's plastics. So things like cellulose scale very well into the world in ways that many of the petroleum-based things that we use today don't work for everyone. So let's talk about, if it will advance here, there we go. So this circle represents 100 billion pounds of polyester that feeds the textile industry per year. So the textile industry is the second largest industry in the world after energy. Textiles is $3 trillion per year worth of stuff. 2/3 of the tonnage of it is the plastics, the main ones you see here. And that's what works for 2.5 billion consumers on the planet that get to participate in the first world economy. There's another 5 billion people on the planet who get to live not as well as all of us because petroleum doesn't scale to everybody. The circle for cotton represents about 59 billion pounds of cotton that are grown in a year. And anyway, that's the balance of the textile industry. And you can imagine that if we go back 60 years in history, it wasn't like this. Virtually all clothing was natural. And it's only been in the past handful of decades that we've gone to what we've gone to. This circle here, which probably is taller than the whole dome that we're standing in right now, represents the global production of cellulose, one of the most abundant natural plastic on the planet that's produced per year. So, and this circle represents just 1% of the circle that you can't capture on the screen. You can capture 1% of it. That's the tonnage, again, of what photosynthesis does for humanity. The sun shines for free. And what we have discovered, so I was a professor at the United States Naval Academy several years back and moved my family to the Midwest later on because my wife's homing beacon went off when children were on the way, and so I moved closer to grandpas and grandmas in Iowa. But I brought with me basically a technology that enables people to use materials like cellulose, so that includes industrial hemp, but it also includes other fiber crops that farmers can grow. And it enables them to potentially make more money, which I'll talk about. The other thing is, so a company like ours who's working with natural fibers has to recognize the fact that you all can't, sounds like the government isn't going to, well, it's still shut down, so we're not going to be able to get that paperwork shoved through anytime soon, it sounds like. So in the meantime, there's literally hundreds of billions of pounds of waste cotton in your closets that's destined for landfill that we've got them solutions to reuse. And so we're doing that now. We're building a prototype textile mill in Peoria, Illinois, and that will be a model for not only what can happen in the rest of the Midwest, but also will, of course, equipment and machinery and things will get exported out to places like Asia and things like that that produce the balance of textiles in the world. Some quick facts. Most people, again, I'm using circles here so people get an idea of acreage and things. This is the acreage of cotton, acreage for corn ethanol, and corn ethanol, it works for my father and brother to a certain extent, but it does not, actually this is not advancing for me, there we go. Anyway, if you simply convert worldwide acreage for corn for ethanol over to things like industrial hemp, well, okay, that could be really good, but why would you want to even do that at all? Turns out that ethanol is a 50-cent per kilogram product, so when you're growing corn and you're selling that corn for ethanol, there's a limit to what you're going to ever get paid for a bushel of it, because it's going to a product that's destined to be burned, and none of us wants to pay very much money for that which we're going to immediately turn the keys of our cars back on and burn. But your textile is very different, and it's what you wear, and I can tell you a story about a subcategory of textiles, which the worldwide precast concrete market in the world, so that's every skyscraper and building and everything that you can imagine, is $50 billion per year, but making blue jeans and people's preferences for blue, different shades of blue, one of the longer running fashion statements since the toga, is a $60 billion per year industry. And that's not just wearables, it's the synthetics that you're sitting on in your seats and in your cars later when you leave here, and in your homes as well. Most of that stuff is plastic today for some variety of reasons that the technology solves. Okay, I'll be glad later after this to tell you more of the science behind this, but in short, what we're able to do is take fiber and fuse it together. So one of the reasons why plastic is dominating the world is because you can melt it and extrude it and turn it into shapes that you want. And we've never had the ability to do that with natural materials. With natural fiber welding, we do. There's a lot of people in the textile industry in particular that talk about saving the world, and that's all well and good, but unless you know what problems you're solving in the industry, no one will pay you to save the world. They'll pay you for a good product that has the right price to performance ratio, but they will not let you save the world just by giving you money all day long. So what we've been doing is we have got a team of about 20 people, a little more than 20 people now, that are PhD chemists and chemical engineers and welders and things like that are building automation that enables fiber and fiber crops and things like that to turn into a variety of things. I could point out, here's a thing that you don't have to use the traditional paper making ways to just use hemp sort of as it comes out of the field. In the meantime, there's materials like this that are in the trunk liners of our car that can be turned into hard boards. So anyway, there's that. And we've been doing this in partnership and with some of the largest manufacturers in the world to show them where the world is headed beyond petroleum and plastic. So that's a tabletop that's made from old waste denim that came from Goodwill. Here's my lovely wife wearing some clothes that we've been making and showing to brands. And some of these clothes solve problems that they have today with cotton that forces them to choose polyester. In addition, we have some other fabric materials that I can show you later that are much like leather, and I enjoy roast and a good ribeye, and so there will continue to be leather from cows in the world, which is fine, but people don't recognize there's $100 billion per year worth of regular leather made, and then there's another $120 billion worth of synthetic plastic leather that people call vegan, but it's really plastic that's in the market. And we're not going after your cows, we're going after the plastic, just to be clear. So anyway, these are large markets. There's large opportunities to use a lot of fiber. And what we're doing on Galena Road in Peoria is we're working and we're partnering with a number of people. So you can be grateful that this is actually a military invention. And to me, it's ironic that we can literally start to beat weapons into plowshares, because this technology came from a fundamental sort of question about what does the laws of the universe allow people to do with natural materials in new ways that solve manufacturing problems that have cropped up because we've been so over-dependent on petroleum. One of the partners I want to point out here is Fashion for Good, which if you Google it, you'll find that their partners include Adidas and PVH, which is Tommy Hilfiger and brands like that. We're working with those folks, giving them fabrics and working on scale-up plans so that they can start to sell you this stuff in the very near future. In fact, the first POs just came in this week. And I think I'm under time, so thanks for your attention. I'd be glad to talk to you all later.
Thanks, Dr. Luke. All right, and we'll go on to Eric. Eric Pullen, Global Hemp.
Thank you.
Hello everyone, thank you for coming today. This has been 20 years in the making that I've been in Illinois trying to get this through, not working only by myself, but there's been lots of other people that have been working on this. When I first got involved with it, my background was to think about a way to have a tree-free paper, and I originally had read about this crop called canaf, which is related to okra and cotton, and it grows really well in Naples, Florida and south, so it's more of a subtropical crop. And being in the Midwest, we need an answer that's similar to canaf but better, and hemp is one of those. And at first I even thought that, hey, it's related to marijuana, and I thought at first it was just marijuana people trying to get it legalized and all this kind of stuff. But then when I gave it a real good serious thought, I looked in and I saw that it really does have a lot of potential. It was just a matter of education. 20 years of trying to get it through, a lot of different politicians, that it's not the same thing and all that, and it's finally here. So there still is going to be a lot of work that needs to be done with the USDA and the Illinois Department of Agriculture in our case, but it's glad to know that I'm here to be able to talk about the actual potential for the crop, rather than talk about the policy. And it's always been like a shell game of, you move one step forward and two steps back. So we really are almost at the very end. The light at the end of the tunnel is actually looking very good. So my company, what I've been doing in the past has been a lot of advocacy, done online sales of various products, getting people familiar with it and finding out what people need to do. But the real true interest has been in processing, but if you can't grow it, you can't really process it. So what I've done is I've studied the industry as it stands primarily in Europe, where they've been growing hemp fiber for a very long time. In fact, in France, they never did stop growing it. And as well as in China, where they've been growing it for thousands of years. So, you know, the thing is, I'll get in, I'll cover over a little bit of what there are for the whole thing. So first of all, as everyone knows, both hemp and marijuana are both cannabis. The legal definition really is based on the percentage of THC and THC alone. So if there's 0.3%, 0.3 THC or less, it's legally defined as hemp. Anything else is marijuana. They're two different crops in the sense of how they're grown. Marijuana is a lot more labor intensive. It's more of a horticultural crop. You could grow it outdoors or indoors. Hemp on a massive scale, you would not grow that indoors. It wouldn't make sense with all the lighting and everything else. So the primary producers are Europe, Canada, China, and the United States. Europe has really focused in on the fiber uses, and they do really well with that. The majority of that, about 80% of it, goes into paper, and actually it's a subsidiary of Kimberly-Clark that makes paper in France, and most of that paper, it's not like the same kind of paper that comes out of trees. It's a very tough and resilient paper, and most of you are familiar with it if you've ever seen Bible paper and cigarette paper, ironically. So a lot of cigarettes that people are smoking, it's actually hemp paper, grown in France and processed there. In China, they are able to have textile grade fiber, and in Canada, their whole market is focused in on seed. They started off wanting to get involved with fiber, but unlike the Europeans, there wasn't an existing infrastructure. And aside from the infrastructure, there's not the subsidies that the European Union has for both hemp and flax. And in Europe, with their current technology, if they didn't have those subsidies, their crop would be dead. So I'll get back into that in a minute and talk about the future. So there's 3 vertical markets for industrial hemp. And I field a lot of questions from farmers. They call me up and we talk a lot, and they'll go on and say, hey, I want to grow hemp, and how much do you make an acre? And it's 3 different crops. It's corn, beans, and wheat. 3 completely different things, whole different way of different genetics, how you plant it, how you harvest it, different markets, so on and so forth. So to tell someone how much you make an acre, it's not that easy. So as you can see here, the 3 different verticals are fiber, flower, which a lot of people are referring to as CBD, which is one of the cannabinoids, but there's several others, and you'll start hearing about a lot of others that are going to be a lot more popular in the coming years. And then there's seed. And so then there's the processing of those 3 different ones that take place. My interest, again, is in the fiber, and for fiber, there's this process called decortication, because the plant itself, the stem, has an outer skin, kind of like a tree has bark, then there's the inner wood. And it's basically about a 25 to 75% ratio, or if you just think of the classic 20-80 ratio that everything else seems to fall into that order, that's what you really have with this. And those 2 different fibers have completely different uses. They have different chemistries. So this is a cross section of the stem. I won't bore you with that so much because a picture will show you a lot easier. There you can see the outer bast fiber peeled back, and that's about 20% of the plant. There's a lot more value per pound in that, but you can't grow the plant, one without the other. It's like anything else. So that also means as a processor, you have 2 different fibers you have to work with. So if textile companies want the bast fiber, you have to find something to do with the inner woody fiber. And actually, by volume, even though it's worth a lot less per pound, volume-wise, they come out at about an even price. So traditionally, when people used to do this in the old times, they used to go out in the field and they would break the outer fiber and they would keep the outer fiber, and the inner woody fiber they would leave in the ground. Today, you would want to get the value out of all of it because once again, it's about half of the value. So it's important to have clean separation between those 2. So if you look here, you can actually see a picture of the bast fiber. That's that outer fiber, kind of like the bark. And then there's the inner woody fiber. And they have 2 different uses. Here's a close-up on the bast fiber. This here doesn't have, that fiber hasn't been opened yet, and there's still a little bit of that core fiber in the middle. And the big thing is you want clean separation for high-end applications for automotive composites, and especially for textiles. And so there's a whole value chain in the fiber. So at the very bottom is paper, because paper is going to be pulped up anyway. So it doesn't matter, it doesn't have to be as perfect and pristine. You know, like if you had wood and you're going to turn it into sawdust, it doesn't matter if it has, you know, imperfections in it, what the wood grain is and everything else. You're just going to grind it all up. So paper's on the bottom. Then you have insulation, which is a layer above that in the value chain. Then you get up to composites, and at the very top of the chain is textiles. So there's dissolving pulp. This is what ends up going into the specialty papers. So some, you know, the currency in your, you know, the U.S. dollar is actually made out of cotton linters, and you know, hemp and cotton and other fibers, you know, they're all pulped in various different chemistries, but there's a lot of similarities that tie into one another. So this is, like I said, what they do with to make paper. There's this dissolving pulp. Insulation, this is a direct substitute for fiberglass, and composites. And this is the one that I've been interested in the most. I have a cardboard panel that's over here behind Liz. If you want, you can lift that up and show it off. And if you look at the actual other side of that, if you could please flip that around, you can actually see that that material in there is a mixture of 50% bast fiber and 50% polypropylene. And polypropylene is a low melt plastic made out of petroleum, and then they put that in a press and they make a part out of it. Soon there will be natural fiber welding that will be able to make those kinds of products without the petroleum, which is fantastic. You can have an all cellulose composite, but for the time being, this is 20 years as a commercial product, so this is not up and coming. This has already been around, and it's been a stepping stone to get away from using fiberglass. Fiberglass was used in the past, then they've moved to this, and hopefully we move to 100% cellulose in the future. Then you can also cottonize the fiber, and this is what you would use to put that into existing machinery that's made for textiles that we're used to. So, you know, like this type of clothing, if it's polyester or cotton, it's completely different than what people use for linen, which is made from flax, which is very similar to hemp. And that's just a whole other process. And the world has moved into the short staple length fiber. So you need to cottonize this if you're going to use it for textiles. There's textiles. Now the core fiber, that's 70% of the plant mass material. So like I said, you can't have one without the other. So you can have this core fiber, and it has its own uses. A very simple use to get involved with is animal bedding, and it's been very popular, especially in Europe, to use it as animal bedding. They've tested it out in the United States. There's a lot of hemp that's grown down in Kentucky, and as you know, in Lexington, there's a lot of really nice thoroughbred horses down there that they use this horse bedding with. But it's a great direct substitute for wood shavings. It cuts down on dust, which is good for the animal's health, especially million-dollar horses. You know, they only get the best. And at Grant Farms, where they have the Clydesdale horses for Budweiser, they have tested it out and they liked it. So there's a lot of interest in animal bedding, and it can also be used for lab rats, or if you have a pet hamster and that sort of a thing. There's a use for it, and it's very low-hanging fruit for a processor to get involved with being able to come up with that as a, you know, maybe that's not going to be your final product, but that's just an entry-level market that you can go ahead and start getting rid of some of the stuff and starting to build some markets. Hempcrete gets a lot of excitement. Hempcrete is the core fiber, and it's mixed with hydraulic lime. It was developed originally in Europe, and it has a lot of interest because it can be used, you would still do normal 2x4 construction, but rather than fill it in on the inside with fiberglass insulation, and on the outside where you're going to use OSB sheathing, and on the inside where you're going to use drywall, this could actually fill in everything on both sides, fill in everything in between the 2x4 construction. There's a lot of local building codes that would have to be addressed, but there's a documentary, Bringing It Home, where there was a guy who had his daughter was chemically sensitive, And there's some people that if they get around carpet that has all the gassing off odors and all this other stuff and synthetic paints and everything else, she got very allergic and very sick. So what they did is they found an architect in Asheville, North Carolina. They built this home that was made out of hempcrete, and she was able to live in that house and not have a problem. So some people are very sensitive. Maybe that's somewhat, kind of like the canary in the coal mine. Thankfully we're not all that sensitive to it, but there's a really huge interest in that. And once again, it's one of those low-hanging fruits. It's a matter of that maybe you're working on the bast fiber, but you have all this stuff left over. What are you going to do with it? It's very simple to have a simple entry market for hempcrete. Building materials, there's medium density fiberboard. You guys have seen that before. Once again, same thing. And then there's even man-made. This is, you take pulp and then you can make it similar to polyester, but made out of fiber, natural fiber, viscose and rayon. That's probably going out of fashion, but it's something that can be made out of it. These are just possibilities. And then there's even stuff that's being used in labs right now. I was even listening to the radio this morning. They were talking about Motorola's bringing the Razr back. And I thought, the Razr, the little flip phone. And they said, actually, there's still a lot of people that will like flip phones, but they're able to have these OLED displays that are flexible, and you'll be able to actually bend it. And same thing with flexible batteries, the body armor, and everything else. And with these, it can be, these materials are not exclusive to hemp. So you can make them out of trees, you can make them out of other fiber crops. Hemp is not the only one, but there's a lot of really cool applications that if we move away from fossil fuels and we move into using agricultural inputs, these are some of the things that, you'll be able to have your cake and eat it too. You'll be able to have high tech, although it comes off of a farm. And people in the past would have thought, no way, petroleum's a big thing, but petroleum allowed us to do all these things, but now we're getting back to working smart rather than hard type of thing. And there's some other things with, this is another thing with nanocellulose, that you can have transparent paper and other things. So there's really cool stuff. The trends, there's all these trends that are going on. There's all different market forces. So a lot of people, when they think of marketing, they might think of advertising and this and that, but true marketing, especially as farmers, you realize that there's trends. And so there's lots of trends out there for things to get more eco-friendly and to move, from transition from one thing to another. And I'm just trying to speed through these so you guys understand that. So even here you have a large Kimberly-Clark, right? And everyone's heard of Kleenexes and so on and so forth. Well, here they're talking about that due to their consumers and their shareholders, they're looking to have sustainably sourced fiber. Now, even in that statement, they're talking about just trees that you're not going to clear-cut forests and then not replant them, such as what they do in some third world nations. So, there's a whole demand to do that, but to even one-up themselves in the same report, they're saying by the year 2025, which is 6 years from now, they're expecting to have 50% of all their wood pulp, I don't know why they call it wood fiber in there, but to actually come from non-wood tree-free sources, such as bamboo. Well, bamboo doesn't really grow too well. We're not encouraging that, but as long as we're able to get involved with industrial hemp, that is definitely one thing where there's huge markets for pulp and paper. All the cardboard that you get, paper, so on and so forth. I don't have to explain to you about that. And then rather than wood has a lot more lignin, so it requires a lot more chemistry to remove that lignin. Annual crops like bamboo and hemp don't have that. So they are more naturally to have a lot of chemistries that are tree-free, acid-free, totally chlorine-free. So they're also a lot more better for the environment. So once again, we have these trends over the past where we had this natural economy, and then they discovered how to make all kinds of stuff out of petroleum, and we've had this synthetic age for the last 80 years or so where everything's been made out of petroleum, and now we're working on getting back to being able to figure out how to make synthetics or natural synthetics. You can take that synthetic technology and make it out of natural products. There's a lot of that going on, and that's where the trend really has to go, because fossil fuels, not coal so much, but definitely petroleum, at the amount that we're going through it, it's not going to last forever. So this is a matter of that it's something that has to be done. So one real world example was the door that Liz had walked around with, and that was a direct drop-in substitute for fiberglass. So at the very bottom there, you see that success is that while a lot of things can be done technically, they have to be done also economically. So that's the big thing is you find different target products, and just because it can be done, you have to find out what can you really do and get paid, and rather than having a hobby doing something that's more of a business. So the fiberglass example as a substitute is one of those classic examples that has actually worked for hemp. So there's a lot of potential for the crop. But conventional technology, they used to use what's referred to as water retting for the natural fiber, where they submerged the fiber into a pond, and they would, and in that pond they would be warmed up water and all this other stuff. But that had a really bad detriment environment to the pollution for the water. So you can't do that anymore in Europe. It's never been done in the United States, but we wouldn't be able to, you don't want to do that anyway. The fiber ends up having an odor to it, so on and so forth. So the Europeans have had traditionally what's called this field retting, and this is where they actually grow the crop, they mow it down, and then it lays out in the field in this retting process. And retting is a derivative of the word rotting, because that's actually what it's doing out in the field. And then what it's doing is there's activity that's eating away the pectin, and this way that later on when you go to do the decortication to separate the two fibers, it makes it a lot easier to make that separation. But you still don't have a clean separation. If you look at these pictures, you don't have 99% separation. You have all these different fractions, and all these different fractions would have to go into different markets. The insulation, people aren't going to want the one, and someone else is going to want that. And what you want is ideally to have 99% separation and little to no waste. So that's actually, what's that? Okay, sorry. So yeah, I'm wrapping up. So it was actually 19 years ago that the USDA put out a report, and they said that, for hemp to be a viable crop, what you would have to do is you have to have innovation on the harvesting and the processing. So that's what I've set out to look into, everything that the Europeans have, everything that the Asians have. And then, what's been nice is that in the Peoria area, there are great natural resources of lots of really good engineers that have worked at Caterpillar and Deere, and they're familiar with all these things. So I hired an engineering firm that I've worked with to try to come up with the equivalent of what I think of as being like the cotton gin. Before the cotton gin came along, cotton had all this potential, but you couldn't really do anything with it because it took a day's labor to go through 1 pound of material. You come out with the cotton gin, changed everything, revolutionized cotton. So here's just really simple with conventional harvesting. While you do have a lot of this equipment, the problem is you're going to end up with fiber that is inconsistent. So the guy that, this material over here, the substitute for the fiberglass that's made in Elkhart, Indiana, that guy takes in a couple of container loads of fiber a week, and he said it's just all over the place. It's not that the container last week is different from this week, just within one container it's inconsistent. He said, I just wish there was consistency. Even if it was all bad, at least it would be consistent. So that's one of the big problems with the fiber, and that's why you've addressed what the problem is, work on the solutions. So there's more conventional things. So I'm going to have to just burn through these, but supply chain management is really the key here. Is you have to work forwards and backwards. You have to work with the end users, and you have to work with the farmers and the processor yourself, and work back and forth, and have all that to figure out how to have the perfect material. Because there's not consistency with the fiber as it currently stands. So my company's mission statement is up here, is to become a vertically integrated processor, and that is to be able to work on being able to work between the farmers and the end users. Similar to seed corn, where you have a similar type of a thing, and I'll burn through here. Once again, we talked about that hemp is not a massive commodity. So if you look at even here in central Illinois, where we have pumpkins and popcorn, where if you look at the stats there, you can see 16,000 acres. So last year industrial hemp went massively large. It was 80,000 acres, and even pumpkins is 16,000. So, you know, I don't think that Morton would turn its nose to not wanting to have Libby's. I mean, there is a lot of economic development opportunity available in industrial hemp, but you want to be very cautiously optimistic in how you go about doing it. Okay, so really quickly, with this. Okay, so if farmers were going to get involved with this potentially this year or even next year, I've said that you already have the machinery available to get involved with seed. There are no processors, but the current market has been people who want certified organic, and that's a very limited market. But they're working currently on being able to allow this for animal feed, and if and when that does show up, you don't have to have USDA certified organic land. You already have the machinery, you already have some of the know-how. The Canadians have already got all this figured out, and that will be, I think, one of the biggest low-hanging fruits if you want to get involved with it right away, would be on the seed crop. And there's different things there, and that's about it. So thank you very much for coming.
As you can see, there's lots of information, and it's hard to get to all of this. But I do want to leave time. We've already run over time, but I want to make sure we leave time for Q&A. So let's just get started right away. You know, I got Leslie, you're back there. So we'll do the best we can to kind of take people in order. If you have questions, go for it. Raise your hand. Classroom system, policy, or agronomy, or some market potentials. Anybody have a question? Yes, sir.
I farm in Sangamon County. I don't have any irrigation. How does hemp handle drought and high humidity?
Your biggest issues is getting that stand establishment without irrigation. That'd be really tough. The value of the seed being so high, you would really want to try to get in drip irrigation of some kind. If you've got to do a watering tank, once it's established, it should be doing all right, but it's that critical first month in May and June that you really want to get good establishment. You could lick some of that problems by going to transplants, put in plugs, and then just water those plugs. That's the best way to do it.
Sir.
Hemp seed, does it have a high germination rate?
Hemp seed have a high germination rate. Depends on the value of the seed. To try good seed, and that's going to fluctuate all over the place. So if you can find a reliable source that has high quality feminized seed, you're going to have to pay for it, but it should be getting anywhere from 85 to 95% germination. But you can buy seed that is quite poor and be less than 50% germination. So it's a gamble.
Sir.
I was interested in smaller scale for CBD production, so I'm actually curious about clarification on the minimum size that you can grow at. Particularly, well, the first question was, it said 500 square feet for indoor. Does that mean in a high tunnel, or does that mean actual indoor lighted production?
The question was for, yeah.
Yeah, it's a minimum of 500 square feet total, and it's ground space.
It's a greenhouse or an enclosed building.
Okay, cool. So then the second question was, there's the NRCS hoop house program. Could you get a hoop house program through the NRCS program and grow hemp in it, cannabis in it? Has that been established yet?
NRCS, Renee, are you still on the line, Renee? Would you happen to know?
I am, but I can't hear the question.
Oh, okay. So, one more time, I'm sorry.
So the NRCS has their hoop house grant program where
Yes.
they do matching funds that I think has been funded again in the new farm bill. Can you grow cannabis in a hoop house that you got from the NRCS?
Can you grow cannabis in a hoop house using an NRCS grant that you know of?
You know, so what happened after the 2014 Farm Bill is that a lot of growers tried to access USDA programs as, you know, as just like they would any other agricultural crop, and there was a lot of resistance at the federal agency level, and so, but that should have been addressed through the 2018 Farm Bill and through other actions that where available USDA programs, whether it's extension agents or, you know, other professionals at the land-grant universities, including conservation agents. Moving forward, I can't say what's going to happen because, a lot of people expected things to be pretty open after the 14 Farm Bill. You should, as long as it meets the definition, is by a licensed grower and complies with USDA and state agency regulations, there shouldn't be a problem. But there's always that caveat.
What kind of field rotation do you have to have when you do field production? Can you literally plant it on the same ground all year after year, or do you have to have some kind of crop rotation?
You're definitely going to want a crop rotation of some kind. We haven't done those studies here, obviously, in the state of Illinois, but most facilities would run maybe back-to-back for 2 to 3 years, and then you would want to rotate off that ground.
Is that because of
Soil
disease
depletion.
problems, or is it?
Well, that's a good question.
Nutrition depletion.
Nutrition depletion, typically.
Like what type? What kind?
Typically on your nitrogen side.
Nitrogen.
In terms of diseases and pests, I didn't have a chance to mention that. We had very little disease and pests this particular year. The one that we saw the most was aphids, but most of our production ground was fairly small. We had only 100 plants in the Mason County one, and we had 1,200 plants for the Warren County one. Radiation beetles were minor, but powdery mildew, someone asked about high humidity. Powdery mildew is the #1 disease that we're going to get on an industrial hemp. And so you need airflow. That's why we have that lots of spacing between the plants, is to get airflow through the plants. Higher spacing, less airflow, more plant disease. You do not want powdery mildew.
Okay, I'm from Cook County, the urban area, specifically urban farming and peri-urban farming. I would like the legal definition of primarily, solely, and incidental. I understand backyard growing, but there are people who have lots that, their primary residence be there, but they are urban farmers. So what is the legal definition of those 3 terms?
I'm assuming that's something that the state proposed?
Yeah, and I guess maybe this is directed to Liz, or...
Yeah.
So to cultivate industrial hemp, you have to be legally defined in the property tax code as a farm. And you have to fit into that boundary of that if it's indoor, the 500 square feet or a quarter of an acre.
I understand that. I'm asking for a legal definition of solely, primarily, and incidental. Because there's now an urban farm movement and a peri-urban farm movement that is totally different than rural farming. So does the legal code address urban farming as a farm?
It currently does not, but if you wanted to send me your comments to the email that I can provide that to you, or it was in the slides, we can look into that. But as of right now, it's just legally defined as a farm in the property tax code.
Yeah, and Illinois Department of Ag are the ones who are actually drafting these rules. So Stewardship Alliance is here to help funnel those public questions to them. But again, people up here might not necessarily be able to directly answer how that legislation is written currently. Sorry, I want to make sure we're getting Wesley. Yeah. Okay.
For Dr. Wynn Pekin, when you tested 1% CBD, what was your, or 1% THC, what was your CBD testing?
12%.
12%.
Yeah, it actually did quite well.
What variety was that?
Yeah. Out of the three in Colorado, who was it? I have all their contact information.
I am not at liberty to share that.
And was it all the varieties were testing the same, or the different phenotypes were kind of all over the board? Did you test more than one plant?
We just did the one variety that we were happy with, and it was 12%.
And you ran from seed?
That was seed.
Yeah, no
that was
clone.
into transplant. It wasn't cloned. We did no clone material. Everything had to be seed in the state of Illinois.
And all the plants tested around the same?
Well, we don't test all the plants. So out of the 1,200, we had to test 3 plants. Those 3 plants all tested low THC, high CBD.
So, what I can tell you though, just for those that don't have genetics, be very careful.
Yes.
There are a lot of charlatans out there that will tell you that they're going to give you 25% CBD and 1% THC, and it's not going to happen. So make sure you get COAs on any seed that you're going to buy or that is provided to you.
COA being Certificate of Authenticity.
Certificate of Authenticity.
Just real quick, when I saw the drawing, it looked like hanging in any barn?
Yep, tobacco barn.
It needs
tobacco
ventilation,
barn.
though. You need fans.
You need air movement. You need
Just
adequate
local
air
fit.
movement.
Okay.
Absolutely. Adequate air, well, the question was drying and curing. Lots of air movement through the building. Supplemental fans down below, just getting that air movement. I mentioned you're going to get mold, and so you want to make sure that you get lots of air movement through the old tobacco barn works fine, corn crib, that side of thing. But don't pack it in. You've got to have that air.
The last one, I've been told 30,000 cubic feet an acre of hanging space for CBD production based on row spacing you had talked about. That was from someone in Colorado we worked with. But my question is actually for Liz, and that's on, have you had any comments in opposition to the writing about requiring AOSCA certified seed? Because I contacted every single state Department of Agriculture. There is not a high CBD certified variety. So I talked to Jeff Cox about this several times. We wrote the regulatory framework, and he was not aware of this until right before he had to turn it in.
So yeah, if you can clarify, or just
Right. So, yeah, the question was, have I received any comments based on the State Department wanting all your certified seeds to go through ayahuasca, which was the Association of Seed Certifying Agencies, right? Yes. Okay. So yes, we have, and people are concerned. I didn't really get to it. I sort of just stuck with the one seed variety that we have to play with. But they are concerned that we are just going through that one certifying agency, and it is something that we are considering making comment on. So if there is something specific that you feel like you would like us to comment on, we would need just a little more guidance with that. But they are, like I said, they are very interested in working with growers and working with universities to certify more seeds.
Everyone I talked to with the Illinois Department of Ag was saying they're not trying to prevent anyone interested in CBD farming. I think they were just unaware that there are no certified varieties. So I know other states have written where basically if you had COAs from parent material, which isn't really the best way to do it, but it was something that proves that your variety had tested under 0.3% THC in the past, they were allowing that. So we could see some sort of language like that.
Right. So his comment was just, we don't have to perhaps go through the certifying agency if they were able to provide some kind of documentation that their seed did test under that 0.3% threshold, perhaps writing that kind of legislation into the rules.
Daryl?
Yes. Yeah, if you're growing for CBD and your neighbor down the road has a small patch of homegrown, how can that adversely affect your crop?
So the question is about if you're growing for CBD, cross-pollination issues, how can someone nearby affect your crop?
It could affect you greatly. Thank you. Yeah, you want to make sure that, obviously, pollen can travel over great distances. There's things in the literature all the way up to 250 miles. So obviously we can't control all that. But if you willingly know that you've got ditchweed in the area, or you've got another producer that's near you and is growing a lot of seed production, has a lot of pollen in the air, it may adversely affect you. Obviously, if they're growing hemp, they should be fairly clean. It shouldn't be hot material. It's the ditchweed and the home growers that you would be worried about, and their pollen getting in the air and hitting your material and setting seed in your stuff. So yes, that is a possibility.
You mentioned that you wanted the THC levels to be as high as possible, obviously without going over the threshold, and so knowing exactly when to harvest. So what is that balance? How do you know exactly when to harvest and have it just high enough but not too high?
Okay, let me clarify that. So your intent obviously is to have the highest CBD oil level as you possibly can. CBD oil is not put onto the plant until very late in the growing season. And so obviously you want that to be as high as possible. But at the very same time, THC is also creeping up. So you're not actually going to be measuring the CBD oil content, you're going to be watching that THC level. So you want to make sure that you're testing those plants. When it got close to harvest, we started our first test in August, the end of August, and then we tested every 2 weeks, all the way up until time of harvest. And when we saw, we went from untraceable THC. We knew we were fine. We went another 2 weeks. Then we got into 0.05. I'm like, all right, it's starting to come up. And then the minute we got to 0.1, we decided, all right, that's enough. Regardless of what the CBD oil was, we're going to harvest. We didn't want it to go over.
Was anybody next? I want to make sure I'm going in order here as best possible. George?
Are there affordable THC testers that a guy can buy, or is it all, do you have to have somebody come out?
You have to have
Yes.
It has to be third party.
Legally, you would have to have a third party do it.
Okay.
But if you want to control it yourself and have your own protocol, which I would highly suggest that you do, there is a company called Orange Photics, I believe it is, and they have this briefcase kit that's about $5,000, and you can test yourself. Or if you're working with other people, you can do that. But it's a gas chromatography that you can do actually on site, and the kit is about $5,000 to $6,000 to do that. And I would highly suggest that you do that on your own. But then legally, yes, you have to send it off to a certified lab to get it tested.
Within the state, is there going to be a limit on the license?
Will there be a limit in the state for the license?
Not that I'm aware of. They have not put any kind of limit on how many people can apply for a license.
May I? So Jeff Cox told us it's just registration, not licensing. So all you have to do once he opens that up, DOA's allowing as many people who want to participate in the program as possible.
Jeff Coxon, he's with the Illinois Department of Agriculture.
Right, so that's applications for
So,
cultivation. Yeah. So that's opening up the application for cultivators, processors, and handlers, that there'll be no limit on that.
So that actually, this is a question for Revolution. Does gaining hemp registration create any type of conflict of interest with your current standing in MJ license?
No, but many of the cultivators, does registration in any way infringe upon our businesses? Is that correct? Yeah. No, but I think that one of the biggest concerns that we have as an industry is that the current CBD products that are out there are not tested. And so the Illinois Department of Agricultural survey that was done, I believe about a year ago, or two ago, found that roughly 80% of the products that were out there didn't have the CBD content that they advertised, and in some cases, many had zero. So, we are very much advocating that all end products end up being third-party tested so that the consumer knows what they're actually getting.
Can I add to that? Not to mention the fact that you don't know what pesticides have been put into that product. So a lot of the products that you're getting on the off the shelf, you have no idea what residual solvents are in that and what pesticides are in that.
Are there any questions about fiber? I just want to make sure, because I'm having a hard time keeping up, but just any fiber questions just before we keep going down CBD road? Yeah.
Regarding fiber, let's say you are starting out with CBD or seeds for food. Can you utilize the plant base in the textile market afterwards, or is that not used?
So the question is, if you're starting with CBD, can that same variety be used toward fiber?
So this is the same question that I posed to the largest processor in Kentucky. The challenge is that CBD stalks can run from a half an inch to 6 inches in diameter, and it's not cost effective to decorticate those stalks. Now, there are hybrid varieties where you can have seed and fiber, but if you think about it, the typical fiber stalk is about the size of your pinky at a max, right? And so for CBD, no, the stalk is pretty much thrown away.
What about like paper products though? Because like
There's not a big enough market just yet, right? Think about the supply chain. We don't have any processors in Illinois. So if you're gonna grow for fiber, you better figure out who's gonna buy it before you grow it.
Okay.
Here you go.
Yeah.
Dr. Pippen. This has to do with this carryover from the weeds in the ditch.
Ditchweed.
Now, I am sure there are plenty of people in this room that fit in this category at a degree or not. There's a lot of people growing marijuana out there and have been for the last 20 years. Now, where I live happens to be on the edge of the Shelbyville Reservoir, which is the largest body of water in the state of Illinois between Lake Michigan and the Kentucky Lake. 300 miles of shoreline. And when the Corps built that in the mid-60s, you see, they buy back, based on 100-year high water mark that they calculated then. So you've got all of these little streams that drain, and in that area of the country where that's built, this is flatter than it is here for the most part.
So real quick, just a question. So we have.
As you can get. Now you've got these flowing in. Now I happen to live in my house less than a quarter of a mile, was on the county board for the, over a 20-year period when people's planting marijuana up one of these little things that's pretty narrow. Now if I was going to put a quarter of an acre or something in, I'd want to put it up here, and that'd be less than probably 150 feet, the handiest place to put it.
Excuse me, what's the
Now,
question?
that marijuana is there. I mean, good
Okay,
Lord.
so the question is you've got property that has a lot of indigenous sort of hemp. Is that correct? Is that what you?
Indigenous hemp, i.e.
Marijuana,
THC,
high THC.
marijuana, real.
With that in mind, the consideration you should place is placing your fields away from that area, or that your property is just not suitable for
And what if
production.
a person puts in
Leslie?
an acre or two of it, and he doesn't even know about people.
Did you have one back there?
You're responsible for your property.
Yes, you've been waiting, man. Next.
I had a testing on the, or a question on the testing.
Okay.
Have you guys established what kind of equipment has to be used? I know you mentioned gas chromatograph, but I know that with that, there's a sample that can make it so if you have THCA in that sample.
Okay, has testing equipment been established? Is that the question?
There are standardized protocols, and they are GC based.
But how is that going to affect, because we're just...
It's just Delta 9, just Delta 9, not THCA or total THCs. It'll be Delta 9 THC.
Sure, but when you run THCA through the gas chromatograph testing, though, it can convert that THCA to THC, and then under that testing, then you could maybe test hot, whereas if maybe it's like HPLC testing, and if you didn't have that decarboxylation, so it's going to have to be standardized.
You have to heat it. You have to
So just we're gonna take a couple more questions, and for these longer conversations, you're welcome to linger around and continue networking, sir. You were gonna go next.
Yes. Question for Dr. Zimmerman.
Start the show here.
I've been involved with growing industrial hemp in Colorado, and you mentioned using glyphosate early on.
That's not actually on the crop. That's just.
No, let me finish my question. We do not allow any glyphosate put in the field because hemp is such a cleanser, it will pull it up, it will be expressed in the flower.
I solely agree. There's nothing registered on industrial hemp in the state of Illinois. The glyphosate was simply to beat back what we were calling the surrounding areas. You can do a little bit in the between the black plastic, but that's it.
We don't do any because we don't want it to be expressed in the plant.
And that goes to his question of the oils that you're buying, you've got to make sure are clean and not have toxins.
Yes.
I got two quick questions. One of them
Let's see if we can condense it to one, because then I'll just take one more after that.
Speak up. On the testing earlier, there was a slide that showed a bunch of laboratories.
Yes.
Is this going to be like Wisconsin, where the state comes out and takes the samples and sends them in? And are we going to be relying on their scheduling? Or do we take our own samples and send them to one of those labs?
They come out.
They're going to come out, they're going to sample the flowers, they're going to bring their vials, seal it up, and take it back.
All right, cool, thank you.
All right, Tammy?
On the licensing, it says that only the licensee can handle, you know, the flower or the hemp. If I have a partnership with my son, can more than one person be on that license? Or do I have to file a separate license for me, a separate license for my husband, and for my son?
You should just be able to operate under that one license as long as their information's on there as well.
Okay, Okay, thank you.
You would list the individuals that are on the
And
project.
that again was if multiple family members are participating in the same business, it's just one license.
What, on that question though, what if you hire someone on that wasn't on the license initially?
You just notify them.
Okay.
Okay. It is 3 o'clock. Given weather and all that, I invite you to stick around, ask questions, submit questions. The slides are going to be available. The video will be available. I'm sorry to cut it short, but given the weather, pending weather. Oh, website. So, oh yeah.
Well, yeah, we would, I mean, yeah, I'd love for it to be Justin, because every day we could spend the whole day there.
Website is up on the screen where I will be posting the video. Greater Peoria, edc.org/farm forums. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you, Illinois Stewardship Alliance and Illinois Farm Bureau for helping pull this together. We look forward to many more conversations.
Yeah.